Hello, everybody! Welcome back to my little corner of the internet where I will talk about stories of my life, my work both as a comic book author and a translator, my cats Hey Hey and Serengeti, and the occasional movie, book, or TV series reviews and recommendations, as well as some rants if the feeling hits. And well, today is a bit of a ranty day mixed with, oh my god, unpopular opinions to spice the thing a bit. Because there's a new adaptation of a book I adore to pieces coming up, and another adaptation of a book that everybody adored to pieces. And let's be honest, there's always another adaptation of something coming up because that's how Hollywood works. Not all movies are remakes, but there are a ton of movies that come from books, comic books, and nowadays, even webcomics. Sometimes those adaptations go past the radar. The original work is not widely known, so absolutely no one knows if the screenwriter made changes, if the characters were originally one ethnicity or sexuality and they are a different one in the adaptation, or if the movie and the book give the exact opposite message once you finish watching them. That doesn't make them good adaptations, sure, but they are non controversial ones because no one listens to the people who actually complain about them because they did read the books. Other times, the original, or the first adaptation of the original, is so widely known that any change from something as insignificant like the name of a store to the big ones like, well, ethnicity, sexuality, and now even body hair of the main characters is talked about, complained about, and discussed in such terms that you wonder what are people really complaining about, and more importantly, what makes an adaptation, you know, bad. So let's talk about how bad adaptations don't necessarily mean bad movies, good adaptations don't mean good movies, and well, sometimes we have to accept that there are certain changes that can be done, but should be done a little bit better than what we have now. And I promise I will not be talking about Stanley Kubrick's The Shining, because, well, King fan here. I can get ranty if I start with that. There's a lot of things that can be changed from paper to screen. Some of those are very important things that actually make the story be, well, the story, while others are nothing more than window dressing. The problem is that it's very easy to get lost complaining about the second and not even caring about the first, or that sometimes, while the window dressing doesn't really change the story because it's different, it makes other problems within the original plot very, very, very obvious. And yet, none of those automatically make a movie bad or good. I would even say that the cosmetic and external changes don't even make an adaptation bad. But I know that fans can be very, very protective of certain elements, especially of the mental image of the characters. Because let's stop being coy. Obviously, I am talking here about the three big changes that make people go to their keyboards in anger every time they are hinted at: gender, race, and sexual orientation of characters. Yes, hey, hey, I am going to mention that. But here's the thing: when it comes to changing a character from male to female, from white to any other race, from straight to queer, 90% of the time, it really doesn't matter for the story. Would it change, say, the murder in the Orient Express if we learned that Hercule Poirot was asexual? I mean, to be fair, given what little we know about Poirot, he might as well be. And that is my point. What is important about Hercule Poirot is that he is Belgian, an odd little Belgian, if Dame Christie was feeling generous with the description, has an amazing ego, and an even more amazing mustache. That's it. So, could Poirot be asexual or played by a black man if someone were to make another murder in the Orient Express or any of his other adventures? Yeah, sure. Why not? Could he be a woman? Again, not seeing a problem there, except, well, most women do not have a mustache. And Christie also has amazing female detectives, including the great Miss Marple. So if you want a single woman as a detective who also happen not to care much for romance, here you go, there's Miss Marple. But race and sexual orientation of Poirot is not that important. And there are a lot of characters like that in Christie's work. Some of them have a specific gender due to their job and the society when Christie wrote them. But if you change the time setting, something some Christie adaptations have done, then there is no problem. I can think of at least one specific adaptations of Christie's work that went and not only changed the time setting, but also the relationship among all of the characters and the job and age of the killer. And no one minded because the movie was pretty good. Even if I think that the specific MacGuffin they used was a bit cliche, but it was a good adaptation, and I'm talking about Identity, that it is based on, and then they were none. I won't say exactly what changes were made, but I can assure you that the killer was not a retired judge. I don't want to give spoilers, so that's it. Now, of course, there are stories where the ethnicity, sexuality, and gender of the character are important. If you are telling the story of a Ku Klux Klan member who saw the error of their ways, well, yes, this person should be white. Not necessarily a man or a straight cisgendered one, but white. If you have a character in a fantasy setting whose race is an obvious metaphor to a real race struggle, or colonization tendencies, well, try to keep the character in the same race. For this I mean, if you have an elf whose whole deal is elf supremacy and how elves are better than everyone else and the superior ones, well, it is better to leave that elf white. On the other hand, if your elves are kept as slaves, have no right in human society, and have been run out of their native homelands by greedy humans, why not cast Native American actors? In the case of gender, if you are changing a man into a woman in a reality-based story, consider how this new woman would deal with the overt and subvert sexism. It is not all catcalls and make me a sandwich jokes. It's also been underestimated, or sometimes even been overestimated. I knew I wouldn't know what to do if you handed me a baby, and yet fiction seems to think women come with an inner manual for those. In fantasy, if your fantasy setting doesn't have sexism or no man shall kill me prophecies, then it shouldn't matter. And the same goes for transgender characters. Hell, the no man thing could also be a way to reassert that yes, your trans woman character is a woman, no matter what genitalia she was born with. In reality, just think about the challenges a trans person would have that a cis person doesn't, and if they matter to the main point of the story. If they don't worry and have a trans character, acted by a trans actor preferably. The point of diversity is not just diversity in the fictional characters, but also on the people who get the jobs. Also, hire more trans actors to play cisgender characters. But if you have dragons, wizards, and gods, a society without sexism or transphobia should not be a step too far. In fact, if you have magic, transsexual people should have it a lot easier than they have it in reality because there should be a spell for that. Sexuality is a bit harder to tackle. Because while in the end it should be as easy as this character is gay, this one is a lesbian, this one is bi, this one is asexual, deal, unfortunately, usually sexuality is very invisible in fiction media until the inevitable "have I mentioned I am heterosexual today" moment. And that is a problem. Sexuality is very invisible, and as annoying as it is when you have the assumption that everyone is straight until otherwise stated clearly with a form written in duplicate, signed by a notary, a huge pride flag in the background, and a sex scene that obviously shouldn't be there because think of the children. Well, yeah, a character mentioning every 5 seconds that, yep, they are so not straight would be equally annoying. But it can be done. Certain movies have done steps towards it, like, for example, the adaptations of it. And I'm sorry, I try to keep King out of those videos, but it's one of the best current examples of updated sexuality I have at hand. Richie Tozier, being gay or bisexual, was spotted in Chapter 1 by many eagle-eyed, and mostly queer, viewers. And it was confirmed in Chapter 2 with both the heartbreak Richie suffered by Eddie's death and we seeing that he had carved their initials in the bridge. Was it in the original book? One could make the argument subtextually, but no, it was not stated outright. Does it change Richie as a character? Hell no. In fact, it gives him some extra depth, especially as he was the one loser whose personal fears are never shown. As a child, he always faces it with the group, and as an adult, The one time he faces it alone, he's already far more scared of his own death than anything that goes on in his life. Which, yeah, can be the experience of many closeted queers, especially in the 80s if we talk about the book. So, you see, subtextually, it makes sense. And what is the point of those changes? Oh, that is the question that the people against them always ask. Why change those? Why not create your own characters? Why push for diversity? And my least favorite, what is the justification of the change? And the answer to all those should be, why not? And of course, there is no need for justification for people to exist. Because at the end, people who are not male, white, cisgender, and heterosexual exist in reality. And art and fantasy should always reflect reality in a way. Sure, the old classics are very white and seen as very male centered. In another rant, I will talk about how there are a ton of women in the classics that are constantly overlooked. But that doesn't mean the stories they tell are exclusively white, nor that future adaptations must adhere to those ideas. I mean, really, you want your all white, all male 12 Angry Men? The movie exists, and it's wonderful. But if you want a little more diversity, there's the remake with half of the jurors being people of color. And maybe one day in the future, we will get 12 angry women or 12 angry jurors of varied genders, and the story will be equally good if it follows the original script, and we will still have the original and the first remake to watch and compare. But as I said, all those changes are window dressing. They don't change the plot or the spirit of the original story. No, not really. They don't, so don't start with that. And thus, they don't dictate if the movie in question is good or bad, and not even if the adaptation is good or bad. It's still in the neutral terms, and it's only the acting of the chosen cast and what happened to the main plot of the story what can make those changes good or bad. So, what makes an adaptation a bad adaptation or a good adaptation? Well, ask yourselves, does the adaptation respect the main idea of the original? Like the whole point of the story? Because if it does, then yeah, it's a good adaptation. If it doesn't, it's a bad one. This is a very, very simplified way to look at it, and I am going to expand, don't worry. But the meat of it is, do I get the same message across if I see the movie and I read the book? Not do I get the exact same scenes, but do I get the same plot? Because, yeah, on occasion, there are good adaptations that give a couple of extra changes that have nothing to do with the gender, race, or sexuality of the characters, but with the time period, or the country, for example. And again, sorry I bring it up again, but as many issues as there are with that adaptation, the time skip from 1958, 1985 book to 1985 2015 movie is not one of them, even if at some points Ben fanatism of the New Kids on the Block gets a bit annoying. Yes, it gets really annoying. 10 Things I Hate About You is a pretty good adaptation of The Taming of the Shrew by William Shakespeare, and I can say with complete certainty that Mr. Shakespeare never once wrote about American high schools or Heath Ledger serenading a girl on the stands. Okay, yes, that would have made any Shakespeare play more fun. Oh, hey, hey. Of course, that is not all. I mean, Watchmen gets more or less the same idea as the comic book, and it's pretty much a scene by scene shooting of the same. But at the same time, the changes that were made, some in the name of making the story more realistic and more understandable for the general public, kinda ruined the real punch behind the characters and the story. And yes, this is partly about the lack of a giant squid in the ending, but only partly because the movie also managed to completely misunderstand Rorschach, which managed to be par for the course, and also a bar so low I can't believe they didn't manage to clear it, and also the squid was important. Seriously, it was. And yet, a bad adaptation is not a bad movie. In fact, Very recently, an adaptation that is not even in name only because movie and book don't have the same name was nominated for Best Movie and won an Oscar for Best Adapted Script. Which, okay, it is an amazing script, and I think the movie actually deserved Best Movie, but it is a terrible adaptation because no one who has read the book would actually think the movie was based on it. I am talking about Jojo Rabbit, an incredibly dark coming of age comedy directed and written by Taika Waikiki, based on the book Caking Skies by Christine Leonens. Now, if you haven't seen the movie, please pause this, go and watch it. Cry your heart out because you will feel guilty at laughing at it, then come back. If you haven't read the book, not much of a problem. It's really not that good, but if you can go and read it too, if you want, well, do that because I am going to have to go in some spoilers here. See, the movie is about Johannes Belzer, a kid who happens to be in the Nazi youth at the very end of World War II and idolizes Hitler to the point of having him as an imaginary friend, also portrayed by Taika Waikiki because the man is amazing. But after a very stupid accident with a grenade at the youth Nazi camp, he's sent back to his mother, and while he keeps working at the youth Nazi camp, because she demands him to be involved, and he's working with the officer that was demoted to paperwork because he was overseeing the situation when the accident happens, that means he starts getting away from all the propaganda. And then Jojo, as he's called by everyone, finds out that there is a Jewish girl, Elsa Nor, just a couple of years older than him, hiding in his house. And Jojo is so dumb that he doesn't realize that this means his mother is not exactly in with the Nazis. Anyway, what follows is both heartwarming and heartbreaking because, well, World War II. But we see Jojo get to know Elsa and realize that Jews are humans too, and little by little grow disillusioned with the Nazi regime and his imaginary friend as the war closes into his little town. The book, in contrast, starts with Johannes joining the Nazi youth at the beginning of the war. And while he does have an injury that makes it impossible for him to stay at the front, and he's sent back home to his parents, where he finds out that they have been hiding a Jewish girl, the injury is definitely not as absurd and light as it is in the movie. Also, while Johannes does get a crush on Elsa, it's never as innocent and loving as Jojo's crush on her. Especially when, being a lot older than the kid in the movie when the war ends, he decides to lie to her and tell her Germany wants to keep her scared and prisoner in his house as his secret wife. Oh, also, there is no sign of Hitler in the book, imaginary or real. So yeah, if the meat of the story was Nazi boy falls in love with Jewish girl hiding in his cellar during World War II, okay, yes, Jojo Rabbit is an adaptation of Caking Skies. And both of them have the message that hate is not natural, that it's something taught to children. However, while Jojo also says that one can be taught to love, to ignore and even unlearn hateful propaganda, and that a good kid will always be good, even if he was playing to be a Nazi for a sense of belonging, Caking Skies doesn't. It says that once you have learned hate, even if your own parents try to make you realize the error of your ways, hate will keep growing, festering, and will end up destroying your life. Yeah, there is no happy dancing montage in Caking Skies at all. So yes, it's pretty much the opposite message from Jojo Rabbit. Mostly because, well, Taiki got the idea to adapt the book when his mother told him about it as she was reading it. And he may have misunderstood what his mother told him, or maybe she didn't remember the main points very well, because Taiki thought it was a heartwarming story right up until he started reading the book. And then he decided that he liked the story he had created in his head a bit more, and went on to work with that, which frankly made a much better story for a movie. I mean, I figure fans of the book might be quite angry about it, but also I figure, why did you not leave our racist, white supremacist, gaslighting character as a racist, white supremacist all the way to the end is not exactly the kind of thing you demand on the internet. Well, unless you happen to be a racist, white supremacist, or the character in question is a villain. But the point is here that yes, even if it is not a good adaptation and any fan of the book coming to watch it will feel disappointed that it's not like in the book, it's still a very good darn movie, like Mr. Kubrick's movies. And I really should stop poking myself with that stick. Sorry about that. Now, finding a good adaptation that is a bad movie is a bit harder. Mostly because good adaptations in general also have other things going their way: a good cast, a good director, an excellent photography, and so on, which of course are what make a good movie. The script is part of it, but not all of it. And as I said, a good script doesn't necessarily mean a faithful adaptation of the original. And let's be honest, even if the most faithful adaptation that you can find that are also good movies, make some changes to the original. We have our Lord of the Rings, or Princess Bride, or Da Vinci Code. All of those movies kept the spirit of the book and most of the scenes, but make enough changes that you can't call them perfect adaptations, even if they are amazing movies. Well, Lord of the Ring and Princess Bride. I didn't like the Da Vinci Code, but that was more like, well, I didn't like the book, so of course I would not like the adaptation. So originally I was going to talk here about The Curse, a movie based on the color that came out of the outer space that, while it does take a few liberties with Lovecraft's original tale, keeps the spirit of the story. When I remembered another, far more fightful adaptation of a book that makes for an incredibly boring, if well made and acted, movie. The Andromeda Strain, based on the book of the same name by Michael Crichton. Yes, the guy that also gave us Jurassic Park. Not gonna lie to you. The book is a bit of a hard read unless you are way into virology, because Mr. Crichton liked to show he did his work on that field. It is exhaustive with the figures and stat and yes, even the graphics in the book. It reads like a virology report. It was as if Jurassic Park came with a manual of how to clone your own dinosaurs. Although I hope that we all agree that that is a very, 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 very bad idea. But if you're into that, fascinating read. And the plot itself, a group of scientists dealing with a virus that either came from or mutated in outer space that can kill human beings in a matter of hours, has no cure, and later becomes completely innocuous for humans, but destroys all plastic and rubber? Yeah, it's a really tense read, even before you add the nuclear weapons. Except for the graphics and the science that keeps interrupting the action and the tension. Because see, Andromeda Strain, both book and movie, being with a scene worthy of any horror movie worth its salt. A military convoy discovers a town in the middle of the USA where everyone is dead, Dave. Some look like they just fell dead in their place. Others had enough time to try and kill themselves before the virus got them, and still didn't die from their attempt. Only 2 survivors are left. An old man who is horribly drunk and scared, and a baby in her crib, crying her heart out. But then we move to the scientist in the lab, and then it's pages and pages and pages and pages of research and discussion of how could that have happened, and tests and more tests, and I must give it to Mr. Crichton, he gave us exactly how scientists must feel when doing tests, because there's never a magic solution or an eureka moment. These guys are lost, and we know they are lost, and most of the tension comes from the fact that they are completely lost. But when that is translated to the screen, it's a lot of people talking science when you just want to go back to the military base and know if any more people are dying, if the virus has been let loose away from where it seems to be contained or something. Spoiler, no, it doesn't. Most of the things go right for the human race, so we don't get wiped out because no mask stops the Andromeda Strain. Even when we get to the part where the virus mutates and the scientists have to decide to nuke the lab before it escapes, we're a bit distracted as the team starts arguing politics as to why they were assembled originally before, well, deciding if nuking the virus is a good plan. Spoiler, it isn't. Yes, the movie is suspenseful. I am not going to deny that. The original movie from 1971, not the miniseries from 2001 that expands it into two parts and makes it even longer. But the pauses it takes make the 2 and 10 minutes hour running time feel like the 96 days that the book covers. It's not bad, just not as good as it could have been if they took a couple more liberties with the book, and they do take them. Like, say, Jurassic Park, which, among other things, gives Alex and Tim a bit more to do, saves Dr. Ian for the sequel, and lets John Hammond survive. The one real change between the movie and the book of the Andromeda Strain, besides the fact that the movie has less virus evolution graphics, is that one of the scientists is a woman. But she's definitely not there for the eye candy, her gender is not anything to be commented on, and while she does create a problem for the team, is one that was lifted from her male counterpart in the book. So yeah, it's one of those gender changes I mentioned at the beginning that really doesn't make an adaptation better or worse. What makes the movie hard to watch is that it's a very fightful adaptation of a book in which nothing actively happens in long periods of time. There's a lot of waiting in the Andromeda Strain, and there is a lot of waiting in the movie of the Andromeda Strain. When I was preparing to do this script, I asked at my Facebook for people's best and worst adaptation lists, and the results were, well, expected. There were a few that tried to condense too many books into just one movie, while others tried to expand a very small book into a trilogy. Looking at you, The Hobbit! But there were also many mentioned where the changes were, at best, cosmetic, and some in the best category where the quality of the movie was far more important than the quality of adaptation. Looking at you, Clockwork Orange! Of course, the worst of the worst tends to be forgotten, so for example, no one mentioned Artemis Fowl. And trust me, I get it. I have my personal hate for certain movies that have changed the original in ways that make me, a fan of the original, squirm a bit on my seat. But I have to admit that as movies, they're good. Sure, Spider-Man shouldn't take off his mask every 2 seconds for every New Yorker to see his face, but that doesn't make Tobey Maguire's or Andrew Garfield's or Tom Holland's Spideys less enjoyable. On the other hand, everyone's races and genders are respected in old, and the movie is still bad, and the adaptation is even worse. So my advice to you this time is to enjoy movies for what they are, and if you are very close to the source material, maybe avoid the adaptations. Chances of them being absolutely perfect are slim to none, so why get angry? You still have the original. I want to thank my dear patrons Mitch Hyman, Elaine Ho, and Jessica, as well as my first supporter Tanya Pineda, and Amy Sung, who is the greatest human being on the planet and without whom these videos wouldn't be possible. And Anya, Hey's bestie, who sent her bestie 2 coffees last month and who should know cats don't drink coffee. I also want to remind you that if you want to support these and my other projects and get your name mentioned here, you can do so at patreon.com/Adalisa, with a link on the description, as I know my name can be hard to spell, and with just $1 a month, you will always be thanked in my videos, as well as to get access to a ton of art before anyone else. Or, as Anya did, you can support me once at coffee, also linked on my Linktree, and you will be mentioned in my next video once for each coffee that you invite me. If you can't support me this way, I also accept likes, subscriptions to the channel, comments so that the algorithm catches engagement, and of course, you sharing the links. I also welcome all your questions, feedbacks, and suggestions in the comments below.